Hi everyone! Many of you will know the Greeble add-on Random Flow, which was released sometime in the second half of last year, I think. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can use this add-on to colorize your panels and greebles using Random Vertex Color, which is one of the options in Random Flow. And I'm going to show you all the different settings. I'm going to show you how you can create the colors and exercise more control over the look that you're going for. And finally, we're going to have a look at how we can render those vertex colors, because by default, those colors will only show up in solid view, but not in rendered view or in the rendered image. If you open Random Flow by using the shortcut Shift and Q, you will get this main window here. And we're in object mode, so all of the main options of Random Flow will only be available in object mode. And the one we need right now is Random Vertex Color. So let's click on that. And this will give us this window here. At the top you can see this drop down. If you open this for the first time, all you will find in there is the option to restore the operator defaults. You can see that I've already saved a lot of presets here. You can use these buttons over here, plus and minus, to save a preset or to delete a preset. I'm going to restore the operator defaults. Below this drop-down we have our color disk, and for example, in order to save a preset, we could simply move this dot around, make it some green color here, and if I want to save that preset, I simply need to hit the plus sign up here. Then I can assign a name. Let's call this test green, hit OK, and the next time you open this drop-down, your preset will be available here. Below the color disk we have a field where we can enter a vertex color name, and I use that all the time to name my presets. And this is important because if I select my test green preset here, nothing tells me which preset I have selected. The drop-down will always show the operator preset's name, but not the actual name of the preset that you're using. So I tend to assign names to my presets, and you can do that after the fact if you want to. So let's just say we'll use the same name that we used for the preset name, so test green. Then I'm going to highlight that name, Control C to copy it, hit the plus sign. You can also make any other changes you want to the settings, and then I'm going to copy that name in here. And as soon as I hit OK, Random Flow will overwrite the existing preset with whatever changes I've made. So let's hit OK. And I'll go back to my operator defaults, and you can see the name changes back to vertex color. If I select my test green preset, it will open the preset, and this time we can also see which preset we're using. If I want to delete a preset, it's the only way to verify that I'm not accidentally deleting a preset I actually want to keep. Because deleting presets is pretty simple. You just need to select the preset and hit the minus button. However, you will not get a warning. The preset will simply be deleted. And also, Random Flow does not have an option to go back a few steps, so you can't use Control Z. Once you've done something, changed settings or deleted a preset, there's no way to go back. Okay, so be aware of that. And that's one of the reasons why, among other things, I always name my presets. So if I hit the minus button, the preset will be deleted. You won't be able to see it right away because everything seems to stay the same, but if I open my drop down here, you can see test green is no longer available. If you've made a mistake, now's the time to save it again as a preset. Okay, because you still have your settings, you still have your name in there. You can create a new preset and basically recreate the old preset by saving it now. But if I go back to my operator defaults, there's no way I can go back to the previous settings. The limit option is for deciding whether you want to create your vertex colors based on objects, islands, or selected geometry. In order to demonstrate that, I've prepared a couple of examples. We'll start with the object example. So here I have a bunch of separate cubes. I'm going to select all of them and then open Random Flow, and I'm going to select the object option here. While it is sometimes possible to use different options and still get a result, I would recommend that you use the appropriate option for what you want to do in order to avoid any confusion. So here we have a bunch of separate cubes, and the object option is the one we want to use. If I go back to my operator defaults, that's the result that I get. And you can see each of these cubes receives a different random vertex color. Depending on what option you pick up here, more options will appear at the bottom of the window. So with the object option selected, we get an object offset here. And if you hover over this field, you get some information, and it says this is the number offset before changing object color, which is a cryptic way of saying that the higher the number is, the fewer color changes you get. And in this case, at some point, everything will just turn black. To be honest, I mostly ignore this option down here. So if you want to quickly change the vertex colors assigned to these cubes, you could use the color disk up here and get a different result. And that is the object option. I'll hit Ctrl Z and go back to my white cubes. And let's have a look at the next example, which is islands. So here I have a single object that consists of a number of panels, and the geometry of the panels is not connected to each other, which means we have a lot of separate geometry here. And in this case, the option to use is the island option. So let's pick this option. Again, this is the operator defaults. Now, sometimes when you change to the operator defaults, everything will turn black, and that is because of the value option down here. If I crank this up to 1, you can see the colors again. I'll explain what all of these options do a little bit later. So let's switch back to island, and you can see each of the panels receives a different random vertex color. And as soon as you choose this option here, you will also get an island offset here in addition to the object offset. And the object offset in this case might be useful if you have a couple of these objects in your scene. In this case, it doesn't do anything. The island offset, if you hover over this field, it's similar to the object offset. This is the number offset before changing the island color. Again, basically this means if you increase the number, you will get fewer and fewer color changes until you end up with something like this. So the numbers range from 1 to 100, both for the island offset and for the object offset. I don't really use either of these a lot. I'm going to hit Ctrl Z to go back to my original object here, and let's look at selections next. Now here I have a single cube, and as you can see, I have subdivided this cube, so I have a little geometry to work with. If I tab into edit mode, you can see I've made a number of selections here. So this would be a scenario where we would use the selected option. So let's click on that and see what happens. And there we go. Each of the selections gets a different random vertex color. Now, as you can see, the area up here only gets a single vertex color. So the way this works is all polygons that are connected by edges are regarded as a single selection and will receive one random vertex color. All of the selected polygons that are connected to the other selected polygons by vertices will each receive their own random vertex color. And you can see here on the corner, we have polygons that are connected by an edge, and consequently, those will receive the same random vertex color. And you may have noticed that as soon as I move my mouse away from the random vertex color window, the window disappears. However, you can always bring it back with the F9 key and continue making changes to your setup here. With this option selected, you will get an additional option down here which says single color. This assigns a single color for faces selected per object. In this case, it will have an effect, but in order to demonstrate how this works, I have prepared another example. You can see we also have an island offset. It actually does something here. The higher the number, the fewer color changes you will get. The object option doesn't have any effect here. Again, this is for a scenario where you have several of these objects, for example, in the scene. Then the object offset option will have an effect. So let me show you what the single color option does. I'm going back one step again to my original object here and select the next example. So here I have a bunch of these subdivided cubes. Each of them is a different object. I'm going to select all of them. If I tab into edit mode, you can see I've made random selections on each of these cubes. And in this case, I want to colorize those selections. So what I'll do is I'll use the selected option, and you can see that each of the selections on each of the cubes gets a different random vertex color. Now, if I use this single color option at the bottom, what happens is that we still get random vertex colors, but for each selection on each of the cubes, the color will be the same. So here we have this purple color on all of the selections on this cube, and on the next cube we have a different random vertex color, but again it'll be the same random vertex color for all of the selections on this cube. And that is how the single color option works. Next we're going to have a look at the rest of the settings, and for this I'll just go back to my original cubes here, and I'll just use this cube here to demonstrate the rest of the settings. With the cube selected, I'm going to open Random Flow Vertex Colors, and in this case we need the selected option to be able to see the effects. And now let's have a look at the other settings we have here. Hue Maximum and Hue Minimum are your color mixer. So these are the two options that let you create any color and mix the colors together by using maximum and minimum values. Sometimes changing the values won't have any effect. For example, if well, it does in this case, but if I switch both of these colors off and change the minimum for blue, you can see nothing really changes. If I change the maximum to 0 as well, we get this effect here, but anything between 0.01 and 1 will not really have an effect. And that's because these fields require a second field to be able to get any effects. So if I crank this up to 1, you can see nothing really changes. As soon as I add another minimum, like the green minimum here, then I can see the effect, and then I will also be able to change the numbers here and get variations for everything between 0 and 1. Okay, so that's something that's important to know. Saturation is the strength of your colors. I'll just go back to the operator presets here, and I need to crank up the minimum value here to be able to see the colors, and let's also go back to selected here. Saturation, like I said, is the strength of your color. Now here we have a setting of 0 for minimum and 1 for maximum. The higher I make this number, the stronger the colors get. If I reduce the number, you can see the colors get more washed out. Value is the brightness of the color. So right now I've set everything to 1, which means that we get 100% brightness. I can make the colors darker by changing these numbers here. And of course I can mix and match this with the saturation to get stronger colors as well. If I bring the minimum value down to 0, you can see part of the selections turn to black. If I do the same thing for the maximum, everything will just turn black. So saturation is the strength of the color and value is the brightness of the color. Next we have the random seed, and here you can change the hue, saturation, and the value. Sometimes some of these settings will not have an effect. In this case, value doesn't do anything. Whether or not changes you make to these numbers have an effect will very much depend on the rest of the settings you have. For example, if I use a grayscale setup that I've prepared here, I can use the value random seed to get changes here, but saturation and hue won't do anything. All I can say is just give it a try and play around with the settings. I have no real technical explanations. Just give it a try and see what works and what doesn't work. In any case, random seed is something that I use quite a lot, so this is a very useful option to have. Next up is hard gradient. I'm actually not sure what that really is. Like with the random seed settings, sometimes changing the settings here will have an effect, sometimes they don't. In any case, for the hard gradient, you always have to choose one of the 3 options. And as soon as you pick one, let's pick hue for example, you can see we get this additional option that says hard gradient stops. And then you can change the number here. This one ranges from 2 to 100 to get certain random effects. I find this a little bit hard to control because I can't predict what kind of effect I will be getting, which is why I don't really use this a lot. And what's important to note is that you can only make changes to the selected option. Right now I have hue selected, so I can only make changes to the hue. Changing the saturation won't do anything, and changing the value won't do anything either. But if I select saturation, I can now make changes to this number here and get an effect, but no changes if I modify the hue number, and same for the value number. And if I pick value, well, in this case it doesn't have an effect. Maybe it would have an effect if I switch that to my grayscale setting here. So here we get a change if we use the value option, but we won't see anything change if we modify hue or saturation here. Personally, I only work with everything from the operator preset drop-down up here down to the random seed, and the rest of the settings I hardly ever touch. I'm going back to my original white cube. So what I'm going to show you now is how you can create colors, how you can customize them and have more control over the look that you want to get. There are a couple of ways you can go about creating your custom colors depending on what you want. I'm going to continue to use this cube as an example. So let's open the random vertex color window and I'll just go back to my operator defaults. And by the way, you can see that going back to the defaults also jumps back to object mode here. The same, by the way, goes for presets. So say, for example, if you create a preset and you're on the island option, this option will be saved together with a preset. And there's nothing you can do about it. It's not the end of the world, it's just something you need to know, because if I open one of my custom presets here, you can see I need to go to selected in this case because I saved my preset using the island option here. With that said, let's go back to the operator defaults, and again let's crank up the value here so we can see the colors, and I'll go to the selected option so I can see the effect of what I'm doing. Like I said, there's a couple of things you can do to create and customize your colors. If you're not going for anything specific, all it takes is basically moving this dot around on the color disk, see if you like the look, and you can use it as it is, or you can start customizing this basic setup. Personally, I prefer to work with presets. Most of the time, I already know that I want to go for a certain look. Let's say, for example, the dominant color should be blue. So first of all, I need to get a setup for a blue color. And of course, I don't want to have to do this every time I create my colors. So that's why I mostly work with my presets. And what you see here in my preset list is some basic presets. And I used all of these to create my variations for the other presets down here. So I have a preset for a basic blue, and in this case jumps back to island, so I'm just going to switch that to selected. So this is my basic blue setup. Whenever I use that, I don't need to, set everything to this blue before I get started. I can already start with this setup and then say change the saturation to get kind of a gradient and make other changes to the setup to get the final look that I want. Again, I'm going to switch back to my operator defaults, crank up the value, switch back to selected. So how do we create these setups? Now, let's say we want a basic blue color here. I'm going to change all the colors to 0 except for blue. I'm also going to crank up the minimum here, although it doesn't really have an effect. And also I'm going to crank up the saturation, which is the strength of the color, make both of these numbers 1, and the same goes for value. And this is my basic blue setup. It may not be a lot of work, but I don't want to have to do this every time I go for a blue look. So I created this and saved it as a preset, and I did the same for green. And it's exactly the same setup, except green is set to 1 up here and blue and red are set to 0. And I've got one for basic red. Again, same thing, 1 for red, 0 for the other colors. But I've also made presets for, let's see, orange, for example. So this is red set to 1 with a little bit of green mixed in there. And this gives me this nice orange color that I can use as a starting point to create whatever I'm going for. And the last one I've got is a basic teal color. And this is blue set to 1 with a little bit of green mixed into that blue color. And the rest of the settings, again, still is the same. And this is how I work with random vertex colors in Random Flow. So I have my basic color presets, and well, I've also created some variations like blue and gray, which are based on the basic presets. And one more setup that I would like to show you is the grayscale. So I'm going back to my selected, crank maybe the value back up again. And in order to get that basic grayscale set up, all I did was switch all the colors to 0, and also I switched the saturation to 0, both minimum and maximum, and I've also switched the value minimum to 0. And there you go. There you have your basic grayscale setup. And I use this a lot to render my panels. So this is a very useful setup to have. And of course I can always change the random seed. In this case, I'll only be able to use the value option to get changes. Saturation and hue won't do anything because basically we have no colors in there. So I can make some basic changes to this grayscale setup, and I can also use it to mix and match it with other colors. So I saved this as my basic grayscale. And let's say I want some green in there, so I'm going to crank up maybe green minimum, and you can see I have no effect at all. And that's because if I mix any of these colors in there, I will also need some saturation. So I can crank this up. I could also play around with the maximum green value, and I will get something like this. Then I could also, of course, increase the brightness and get different effects like this. And I think I've got one green tint. Is it green tint desaturated? I'm not sure. Yeah, that's one of the setups. So that's how you can modify your basic grayscale setups and mix some colors into your grayscale preset here. And that is how you control the creation of your colors. So for me, it's basically using some basic setups as a starting point and then modify those using the settings down here. And we could do the same thing with a blue setup, for example. Let's say I want a gradient, so I already know I need to bring the saturation down, maybe not all the way because the colors get really bright. And if you remember, saturation is the strength of the color. So let's maybe put this to 0.1 or 0.2, something like that. And there's a little too much purple in it, so I'll need to mix some green into there, maybe change the maximum a little bit. And there you go, you have a nice setup for bluish shades that you can use. So this is how I use Random Flow to create my custom colors and have more control over the look that I'm getting. I really hope this section was helpful, because when I started using Random Flow, using the random vertex colors wasn't a lot of fun because I didn't really know what I was doing. And you know, most of the time you don't go for a completely random setup like this. Usually you want something that is more customized and has a certain theme to it, you know. Part of the creation of your colors will, however, always be random. It is a random generator. And what that means is you just have to try things out, change the settings and see what you get. But ever since I started using my basic presets, I was able to get the look that I wanted much faster than I was at the beginning. There's one more thing I want to cover in this tutorial, and that is how you can render your vertex colors. Like I said at the beginning, you can see the colors in solid view here, but you won't be able to see them in the rendered view or in the rendered image. Rendering your vertex colors is actually pretty easy. So let's go and have a look at how we can do that. Here you can see a scene that I've prepared, and I have some panels in here, and I have assigned vertex colors to my panels. And if you've followed the tutorial, you will know that I used the island option to assign the random vertex colors to my panels. In this scene, I have already set everything up, camera, lighting, and all we need to do is find a way how we can render the vertex colors here. We are currently in solid mode. If I switch to my rendered view, you can see that all of the panels turn white again. And it's really easy to change that and render those colors. There's only two things we need to do. First of all, with the object selected, let's go to the material properties here and create a new material. That's all we need to do. If we don't want to, we don't need to make any other changes here. The other thing we need to do is we need to go into the shader editor. So I'm creating a new editor here and switch that to the shader editor. And here you can see our material. I'm just going to hide the end panel and zoom in. So all we have in our scene is this principled BSDF shader. And what we need to do is add one more node. So let's hit Shift and A and use the search function. And you want to look for color. And the one we need is the color attribute node. So I'm going to add this, and then I'm going to plug the color of this node into the base color of my BSDF shader. And you can see immediately the vertex colors become visible in the rendered view, which means we can also render them. So let me just close this editor. There's a few things I have done for the final render. One of them is if I tab into edit mode, you can see all of the edges have this light green color. That's because I've selected them all and marked them as freestyle edges. I want to do a freestyle render. My render settings are pretty simple. Everything's default. I'm using cycles with the supported features and I'm rendering with my GPU. Also in the render settings, I have switched on the freestyle option by checking this box here, and I've changed the line thickness from 1 to 0.6. And in my view layer properties, you can see we have a whole bunch of freestyle settings here. The only thing I've changed is under the freestyle line set. If you scroll down to the edge type, I've added edge mark and contour. Okay, so let's hit the F12 button and render the image. So there you have it. That's how you render your vertex colors. I hope you found this video useful. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you again soon in another tutorial.